Andrew Habet, and this is a special episode of Marafaya, presenting an audio version of Marine Protected Areas Are Everybody's Business, an article originally published with Climate Spotlight on November 18, 2025. To view photos, videos, and links connected to the story, visit climatespotlight.com/Marine Protected Areas Are Everybody's Business. To read more of my reporting, follow me at Andrew Habet on Instagram, TikTok, or LinkedIn. Marine Protected Areas Are Everybody's Business. Belize is on track to protect 30% of its marine environment by 2026. What does that mean for those doing the protection? We were wrapping up the morning's patrol in Port Honduras Marine Reserve when Mark spotted something bobbing among the waves. He steered the boat towards whatever was floating in the water. Initially, it seemed to be some debris tangled in sargassum, a sight we'd seen several times that morning. As the boat approached, though, the object's identity became unmistakable. It was a hawksbill turtle, ensnared in a gill net, dead and bloated. Mark Jacob, a ranger with the Toledo Institute for Development and Education, TIDE, moved the boat in parallel with it. He and one of the Belize Coast Guard seamen hoisted the swollen animal into the boat. It thud as it hit the bottom, still encased in the net. It was not the gear sole victim. Mark and the two seamen removed the net foot by foot from the sea as more marine animals began to litter the bottom of the 22-foot boat. Those captured included several eagle rays, parrotfish, conchs, and adult-sized lobsters. At one point, while the work continues, Mark looks over to me and says, "Look like you know I make it back for the interview." I do make it for my interview, but removing the net takes more than an hour. By the time they're done, much of the deck is covered in the nylon net. Its victims, already rotting in the summer heat, overrode the fresh salt air. Animals that emerged alive, Mark and the seamen tried to cut out of the net before they suffocated, sparing the lives of a few rays and finfish. Those that didn't survive joined us back on the mainland, where tide rangers later inventoried and destroyed them, the meat no longer consumable due to spoilage since ensnared. Tens of fish and hundreds of dollars in fisheries products wasted from one net. As we prepared to leave the site, an area frequented by those conducting illegal fishing, Mark spotted a boat in the distance, which he suspected may be the one that had left the net in the first place. But it's no use going after them. There's no way to prove it's theirs, and more than likely, their vessel can outrun the one we're in. So Mark opens the engine and resumes the journey back to the mainland. 30% by 2026. It was an overcast day on August 4th when that gillnet was recovered. I was on day 2 of a 24-hour stay with TIDE to learn more about the work of Marine Protected Areas Rangers, those on the front lines of enforcing regulations within Belize's 16 Marine Protected Areas. The investigative team had set out to learn more about the work involved in scaling up enforcement to coincide with expansions to these sites in compliance with the Belize Blue Bond. The agreement is a debt for nature swap between the government of Belize and the Nature Conservancy, which refinances $364 million USD of Belize's debt to a lower interest rate, freeing up $180 million USD for marine conservation. Over the course of 6 months, we spoke to representatives from 6 of 7 of Belize's Marine Protected Areas co-managers to learn more about their jobs and what they believe it will take to meet Belize's ambitious and contractual goal of expanding its marine protected areas to 30% by the end of 2026. Per the terms of the Conservation Funding Agreement, part of the Blue Bond Act, completing this expansion is one of 8 milestones Belize must meet. These milestones, in part, intend to align Belize's marine space with the Global Biodiversity Framework's 2030 targets, which include protecting 30% of the marine space globally in a bid to stop and reverse biodiversity loss. The Belize Fisheries Department, the sole MPA manager for 5 MPAs, did not respond to email requests for an interview. Much of the media coverage of the Belize Blue Bond has amplified a celebratory perspective in coverage by outlets such as the New York Times and Bloomberg, which cautiously endorse Belize's Blue Bond as a model for other developing countries rich in biodiversity seeking to reduce foreign debts, a mechanism TNC has since deployed in the Bahamas and Barbados. However, those on the ground who spoke with Climate Spotlight shared a much more complex picture. Despite millions of dollars allocated to fulfill the terms of the Conservation Funding Agreement, those on the front lines of enforcement face an incredibly daunting task. They must both sensitize users, primarily fishers and tour operators, and enforce rapidly expanding protected areas, For example, the Sapodilla Marine Reserve has already been expanded 8 times its pre-2020 size. The story of the Belize Blue Bond. A blue bond typically involves an agreement between a country and a third party that purchases a country's debt on the market, usually at a discounted rate, then provides that debt back to the indebted country in exchange for negotiated conservation commitments. It's a financial mechanism that's received wide acclaim, including winning 2 environmental finance bond awards in 2022, as a means of reducing a formerly colonized country's debt and advancing global biodiversity commitments. In 2020, Belize found itself in unprecedented dire straits due to the combination of the severe economic impact of the COVID-19 pandemic and the impending default on its Superbond 3.0, an inheritance from an earlier PUP administration that threatened to further weaken the Belize economy. By the time the People's United Party came to power again in November 2020, the pandemic had already severely impacted the country's tourism-dependent economy, sending the country's debt above 100% of its gross domestic product. According to the Caribbean Development Bank, the pandemic decimated the tourism industry, as the Philip Golson International Airport was closed and cruise ship calls were halted in March that year to mitigate the spread of the virus. Therefore, the PUP government renewed negotiations about a possible debt-for-nature swap shortly after its win over the incumbent United Democratic Party, which had held office since 2008. Many across the country and internationally lauded the PUP when they announced, a year after their election in November 2021, that they had successfully negotiated a debt-for-nature swap, referred to as the Blue Bond Agreement, with TNC. In the view of its architects, the Belize Blue Bond provided both a new tool for conservation financing, as it sought to reduce Belize's outstanding debt, and a means for the country to commit some of its savings to Belize's marine conservation efforts, in alignment with global 30 by 30 commitments. However, there's more to the story. UK charity Debt Justice released a brief in May of this year on debt-for-nature swaps, including the Belize Blue Bond, stating that debt-for-nature swaps reduce debt 7 times less than debt restructurings. In that brief, Debt Justice demonstrated that, unlike what had been touted by the Prime Minister himself, the bond didn't actually save Belize over $1.1 billion. According to Debt Justice policy advisor Tess Wolfenden, Belize actually saved 5.8% of the amount owed on the Superbond, rather than the 12% stated by the government of Belize. This discrepancy comes from fees the government of Belize is responsible for paying over the course of the bond. Among those fees, Wolfenden states, are those that the country has to pay to process the loan and public risk insurance guarantee from the International Development Finance Corporation of the United States, which is insurance purchased with public funds that ensures TNC's investors' loan is covered should the government fail to cover its payments. As of publication, TNC Belize has not responded to questions about the source of the discrepancy. Additionally, the brief cites $1.25 million USD per year penalty Belize faces if it misses any of the milestones, and an additional $125,000 for any additional milestones missed after, as reasons the agreement was unfavorable to Belize from a financial perspective. Alana Godoy, TNC Belize Blue Bond Director, stated that according to the terms of the Conservation Funding Agreement, Belize is provisioned for 2 60-day grace periods to meet milestones should they require more time, an option the government might want to consider with recent critique at the Senate for attempts to push through a revised Integrated Coastal and Ocean Management Bill per the terms of Milestone 5, due November this year. In light of these looming milestones, Belize's Rangers and Coast Guards are now stepping up to the challenge with a wide range of tools to strengthen MPA enforcement. The work of an MPA Ranger. MPA Rangers, also known as enforcement officers, often work in remote areas based at island fuel stations within their designated MPA for an average of 14 days at a time, with an average relief time of 10 days. While on active duty, Rangers work to ensure users of the MPA comply with its regulations as legislated by the Fisheries Act, the Fisheries Resource Act, the Belize Coastal Zone Management Act, and individual MPA's statutory instruments. Compliance enforcement takes form in 2 main activities: enforcement patrols and education. Ranger teams typically conduct an average of 1 patrol a day, with patrol routes predetermined before launch to maximize effectiveness according to where illicit activity has been cited. Using primarily boats ranging in size from 20 to 25 feet for fuel efficiency, the patrols can last anywhere between 4 to 8 hours, depending on the activity encountered. The teams vary their patrol time to mitigate predictability, sometimes starting patrols in the early morning at 3 or 4 a.m., or conducting night patrols to catch fishers hoping to elude detection via the cover of dark. Marlon Chan, a ranger with the Southern Environmental Association, or SEA, said, I would tend to want to meet the fishers when they're still diving. Often, though, patrols occur without encountering anyone actively violating regulations. Instead, what they usually encounter are passive fishing gear like gill nets, line hooks, and fish pots, which are left in place by fishers to be collected later. As mentioned, co-manager rangers often conduct joint patrols with members of the Belize Coast Guard. This is, in part, a matter of jurisdiction. As fisheries officers, rangers have jurisdiction over laws and regulations regarding fisheries and protected areas. Unlike MPA rangers, BCG seamen also have the authority to arrest persons found in violation of laws outside of those concerning fisheries or protected areas, such as illegal firearms, drug smuggling, or piracy. This partnership also occurs due to another factor: firepower. Joel Verde, Executive Director at Sartaneja Alliance for Conservation and Development, otherwise known as SACD, which co-manages the Corozal Bay Wildlife Sanctuary, shared that, quote, NGOs find it hard to take responsibility for weapons, unquote. Therefore, members of the Coast Guard are often requested to accompany rangers on patrols, especially for transboundary ones, in the north and south, lending their firepower should engagements with other boats escalate. The desire for partnering with law enforcement is now extending to police as well, with SEA's Interim Executive Director, Wilbur Garbutt, stating, "We hope that when we have another conversation with you, that we'll be able to report that we have 2 policemen on board with us, along with 2 Coast Guards, which strengthens our firepower that we hope we'll never have to use." Much of the Rangers' time is taken up with what they refer to as boat-to-boat activity, which SEA's Protected Area Manager, Andrew Kuo, calls Jehovah's Witnesses on water, due to the proselytizing nature of the work. Kuo said that in boat-to-boat activities, rangers go about within the park, encountering every fisherman that they can and spreading the word about the regulations. These encounters often include snacks for fishers to incentivize interaction. Captain Romero, a fisherman of 20 years, said that breaking the heads of spiny lobsters to retrieve the extra meat can be a painful and burdensome task, especially while bobbing on a small sailboat off the coast of Belize. Yet this is exactly what we saw him and some members of his crew focused on as we approached them for a boat-to-boat session organized by the Belize Audubon Society in the Lighthouse Reef Atoll Marine Reserve, a MPA within the Belize Barrier Reef Reserve System. We do the work of the lobster head because that helps us to make our provisions. It makes it easier for us, Romero told Climate Spotlight. He captains a crew that travels from the northern village of Chinook's Corozal to work the waters on the outskirts of the Lighthouse Reef Atoll Marine Reserve. Outside of active patrols and education, rangers occupy their work time cleaning sites within the MPA and logging patrol data. With the expansion of several MPAs since 2022, rangers are devoting even more time to awareness campaigns about the expanded no-take or conservation zones, which are more restrictive than MPA general use zones. Carlos Arevalo, chairman of the Chinooks Fishermen Association, says that though fishers in CFA resist the expansion of protected areas, saying it's taking a bite out of the fishermen's livelihood, they still endorse it for sustainability, recognizing the long-term benefits of co-managers' work in curtailing unsustainable fishing practices in MPAs like gill nets and line hooks. Of the 7 that applied up to 2024, CFA is the only fishers organization so far to receive a grant from the Belize Fund for a Sustainable Future, otherwise known as the Belize Fund, a trust developed to disperse the savings from the Blue Bond to support the conservation funding agreement's milestones. While CFA has received funding to develop a multi-purpose center and provide business training to its members, fishers like Eworth Garbutt, president of the Belize Flats Fishery Association, view the Blue Bond with skepticism, questioning how Belize ever got to the point of displacing fishers for conservation mandated by what he views as external interference. Garbutt states, "I refuse to take any money from the Blue Bond grant. I don't want any because what is significant about all the projects I've led is to show self-determination." In his view, the primary beneficiaries of such grants are hotels like the Biltmore, which frequently host government events. Garbutt alleges that to date, the people who need it most, they are not feeling anything as yet. During the 24 hours Climate Spotlight spent with the Tide Rangers, most of it was spent at their station on Abalone Key, where the Rangers passed the time between daily patrols, resting, cooking, and planning their next patrol in coordination with the Protected Areas Manager, usually stationed on the mainland at the co-manager's offices. Working from a field station, however, does have its drawbacks, with several rangers like Ewan, Jacob, and their superiors lamenting the time rangers regularly spent away from their families. Kuo stated, "Some people won't take the lick our rangers take. Connecting to families on the mainland is much simpler for those stationed in places with internet connections, though more remote locations, such as C's station at Little Waterkey in the Gladden Spit and Silk Keys Marine Reserve, struggle to get even phone service." Chun, the previously mentioned Sea Ranger and father of two, stated, 2 weeks away from my kids and my common law wife, I would call it neglect. Due to poor communication, I would not get in contact with them. Meanwhile, at Abalone, the 3 Tide Rangers and 2 Coast Guard seamen sat around Sunday evening, messaging friends and family or streaming videos, the station's generator humming in the background for a few hours after nightfall. Comfortable surroundings aren't available for all rangers though. According to Kawa, it's really bad when it comes to the King Tide at Sea's Little Water Key. It gets flooded, and then you have to be walking in water. Abalone Key, the current location of Tide's fuel station in Port Honduras Marine Reserve, has experienced significant erosion, even with attempted erosion mitigation, leading the co-manager to make the decision to soon move its Port Honduras station to the mainland. In Kawa's view, if it weren't for Ewart Garbutt and all the people of the community who contributed to erosion interventions, we wouldn't have Silk Keys. The same applies to Laughing Bird Key National Park. Despite being at the front line of enforcing Belize's marine protected areas and facing the risks involved, rangers are generally entry-level positions, usually requiring a minimum of a high school degree. While Chun was studying to become a teacher before moving to Plasencia from Punta Gorda to join Sea, Jacob moved to Punta Gorda for his wife's job, joining Tide shortly after receiving his boat captain license. Some, like Ewan at SACD, had a more circuitous route to becoming a ranger. He stated, "When I started in conservation, I was doing accounting. Then I transferred to being a ranger, then to a quick response team, before he moved to SACD and assumed the head ranger position." The starting salary for a ranger is roughly 1,200 Belize a month at most co-manager organizations, with more possible for those already in possession of a fisheries officer certification, tertiary education, special constable designation, boat captain's license, or prior experience in protected areas enforcement. Some MPA co-managers pay more than others, though Ewan shared that greater pay doesn't always translate to improved quality of life, stating that while he's heard Holchan Marine Reserve Rangers receive 2,000 Belize a month, the higher cost of living in San Pedro nulls out the increased salary. Dr. Arthur Tunde, president of the Western Indian Ocean MPA network, WIAMSA, and a former ranger himself, says that salaries for rangers tend to be low worldwide, stating that in Kenya, rangers are paid an average of $400 US a month. Low wages contribute to job retention issues. In Kawa's view, rangers get the training that they need from sea and then just leave to start tour guiding or go to other NGOs because they pay better. In the case of SACD, stagnant wages weighed heavily in their ranger team's decision to quit. According to Verde, by the end of 2024, almost a year ago, we lost our entire fleet that we had with us for 6 or 7 years. WIAMSA has addressed retention issues through its Rio Compass courses, providing capacity recognition and building for MPA employees seeking upward mobility within the conservation field, an effort that has seen no duplication outside of that region, according to Tunde and another Rio Compass researcher. The relatively low wages that rangers receive limit the applicant pool, with Tide Executive Director Leonardo Chavarria Jr. stating, "People don't want to work for $1,200, $1,300 a month, leaving their families for 20 days a month, so they don't apply. That limited applicant pool has contributed to a shift in demographics since the establishment of the country's protected areas." According to Tide's terrestrial manager, Mario Muschamp, a ranger with over 26 years of experience, when protected areas started, we were focusing mainly on hiring people impacted by the declaration of these protected areas. Rangers came from the communities impacted by their establishment, with co-managers hoping to get more community buy-in by hiring from among the community. Over time, though, there's been an increase in hires from military veterans. Chavarria says that this was not a proactive policy decision. Rather, co-managers hire the best from those who are interested, and these are normally ex-farmers, soldiers, etc., and they already maybe have a pension. Such a pension helps to supplement their income. Hiring people with military police experience also has the benefit of bringing their security experience and familiarity with firearms, as well as the hardiness gathered from years' worth of military operations in rugged terrain. John Romero, a Belize Defense Force veteran and Tide Ranger, said that compared to his years of bushwhacking and sleeping in the rainforest in the service, Rangers live good in terms of hardship. While Romero and others have settled into their jobs, new challenges amplified by the Blue Bond mandated expansions demonstrate that the work of a ranger is about to become much more difficult. New challenges and increased risks at sea. In the course of their work, rangers have used a variety of tools to stop and prevent violations under their management. These items include knives, GPS systems, and compasses for navigation, and measuring tools to ensure that harvested products, primarily lobster, conchs, and Nassau grouper, meet the legislated size minimums. More recently, these traditional tools have been supplemented by a variety of digital monitoring and surveillance technologies. The most commonly used across co-managers is the SMART system, an application that was first rolled out in Belize in 2015. Kawa of Sea stated, SMART records the amount of fuel and distance covered and allows her to see the ranger's observations and upload the evidence. With the passing of the Blue Bond and the unlocked conservation funds, some co-managers have allocated a portion toward expanding their surveillance technologies. In the case of Sea, they used money from the Belize Funds Grants Award Program to purchase and install a camera tower at Laughing Bird Key. This device, equipped with a 360-degree view of the island and surrounding waters, as well as night vision capabilities, is now monitored by rangers whenever at the station. Commenting on its use, Sea Enforcement Officer Malan Chun stated, "It's just like we are patrolling. When we are not doing patrols, we would have someone checking on the cameras to see." Kawo says that the camera has allowed for immediate detection of users in the area, allowing rangers to conserve precious fuel in their patrol efforts and also providing recording capabilities that help them to identify possible culprits. Within the government, changes in enforcement have also happened as a result of the Blue Bond and the rising cost of fuel. Along with 5 other government agencies, the Belize Coast Guard received funds from the Belize Fund's first round of government strategic allocations. The Blue Bond and Finance Permanence Unit, BBFP for short, within the Office of the Prime Minister, is the only unit within the government that can access funding directly, according to the Belize Fund Program Manager, Josue Aliva. Between 2023 and 2024, the Belize Coast Guard used its $1 million allocation to support the acquisition of 4 drones from U.S. manufacturer Skyfront. BCG also sent 6 Coast Guard members to train in San Francisco with Skyfront staff in drone piloting and maintenance. One of those trained in piloting and maintaining the drones was Lieutenant Emerson Garrido, who serves as BCG's Drone Squadron Commander and is a graduate of Heroica Escuela Naval Militar in Mexico, where he received a degree in Naval System Engineering. According to Garrido and the GCA proposal submitted by the BBPFU, the drones were acquired as an innovative way for BCG to fulfill their conservation enforcement mandates. As opposed to requiring 200 gallons of fuel per patrol, Garrido states that the drones can complete the same patrol route with 5 gallons, with an average flight time of 5 hours per trip. Garrido estimates that since the squadron began operations, they have patrolled 30% of the country's marine environment, deploying from forward operating bases on Calabash and Hunting Key, as well as the BCG HQ in Belize City. Garrido views the drones as the BCG's eye in the sky that ensures that the protected areas are always monitored. The push for international collaboration. Even with all the additional tools for enforcement patrols, Tunde Aboyamsa stated that enforcing expanded MPAs is no longer only about patrolling, but negotiating with other sectors. Tunde stated, enforcement of MPAs will be about addressing conflicts and land planning. For instance, as rangers in transboundary areas further their patrols near the national borders of Honduras and Guatemala, their encounters with fishers not previously met will increase. In response, there has been a more concerted effort to expand collaboration with Guatemala and Honduras in their enforcement activities. As Cs. Wilbur Garbut put it, those who are caught are in between 3 hammers instead of just between a hammer and an anvil, referring to regional efforts to disincentivize unsanctioned transboundary fishing. The Tri-National Alliance for Conservation of the Gulf of Honduras, or TRIGO, is one regional effort aimed at improving enforcement across the Gulf of Honduras. However, Garbut alleges tensions remain due to Honduras and Guatemala's respective claims on parts of Belize's territory, including the Sabadilla Keys, which are reserved areas. To support TRIGO's efforts, the Belize Fund's Executive Director, Leanda Cho Ricketts, stated that funding goes to them to support various meetings in Guatemala and Honduras with their partners, as well as some awareness trainings and some capacity building for those communities. In addition, Tides Chavarria states that fishery laws are not harmonized regionally. For example, Chavarria says, if I caught you with a turtle in Belize, I might charge you $2,000 Belize, plus you could get prison time. In Guatemala, you could get charged like 500 quetzals, about $130 Belize, and there's nothing else. So people from Guatemala don't care. They'll come and overexploit whatever you have. Transboundary issues are also prevalent due to differences in how rangers and fishers access protected areas. Wilbur Garbutt shared that crossing the reef to return to Little Water Key can prove extremely dangerous, while fishers coming from Honduras don't need to cross the reef to return to the mainland and are more willing to take the risk of navigating hazardous sea conditions. Therefore, Garbutt stated, "Before I send a captain out there in the night at certain times of year, I'd prefer that the fishers come and take the spoils. The safety of our rangers and vessels come first." Even so, despite the threat of transboundary fishing, local illegal fishing remains the prevailing concern. In Chavaria's view, we can't just blame it on the Guatemalans and Hondurans all the time because it's not completely true. It's scapegoating. At Port Honduras, for instance, TIDE has observed a rise in the use of fish pots by locals since the COVID-19 pandemic. Chavaria stated that a single fisher can have hundreds of fish pots that they deploy and check for fish when able. In the interim, Chavaria alleges that up to 80% of the fish die in the pot, wasting fish product. Measuring efficacy of MPA strategy. Measuring efficacy of MPA strategy. With all the effort put into enforcing Belize's MPAs, the question remains how effective they've been at mitigating unsanctioned activities within the various zones. In Chavaria's view, we are far below the enforcement needs of the MPA expansions. Asked how they could better meet the challenges of enforcement, all MPA managers expressed a desire for more funds to hire more rangers and purchase more vessels. One way Chavaria suggests this can be done is through an increase in park fees. Right now, the user fees are like $10 US per person. Imagine that. Which protected area would you go to in any other country for so little, enjoying that type of beauty? We could double that. That solution may come to fruition as in late October, the BBFP released a request for proposals on the same topic. As for the performance of Belize's MPAs so far as a biodiversity measure, a 2017 peer-reviewed study used a comparative analysis of reef sites at 8 marine protected areas and 8 unprotected sites. According to the results of that study, fisheries restrictions alone do not lead to increases in coral cover even when successful for fishes. A more recent study published earlier this year on the Nassau grouper indicated that, despite the protections provided to the fishing spawning aggregation site at Glover's Reef, the Nassau grouper remains at risk of complete eradication at the site should current trends continue. Reflecting on the study's results, lead author and former research coordinator at Wildlife Conservation Society Belize, Miles Phillips, stated that there's only so much that can be done by MPAs, recognizing the efforts put into managing these sites by fisheries officers, fishers, and other stakeholders. Simultaneously, Phillips cautioned against blaming fishers, stating, "It's a big pet peeve of mine to blame fishers for everything happening in the marine space." Phillips added that in recent years, it's become increasingly difficult for conservation organizations to source international funding, making long-term biodiversity projects difficult to sustain due to potential donors' interest in results within a 2 to 3 year funding cycle. Therefore, it's more feasible for co-managers to conduct biodiversity research when they are able to partner with research groups. Friends of Swallow Key, co-manager of Swallow Key Wildlife Sanctuary, one of the smallest MPAs, is currently conducting bioacoustic research and the Antillean manatees with the support of the Technical University of Catalonia's Laboratory of Applied Bioacoustics. Through this partnership, FSW received hydrophones for deployment in the MPA and later sends the aggregated data to lab to produce research that may help FSW better manage the site. The Blue Bonds Conservation Funding Agreement does not explicitly require that the government of Belize demonstrate improvements in biodiversity in its MPAs, with the Belize Fund's ED, Dr. Cho Ricketts, stating that it's through their management plans that managers would outline their monitoring programs and their enforcement programs to demonstrate site effectiveness. Tunde Aboyamsa stated that, without measurement or accountability, it's just declaration. And Muschamp at TIDE called the notion of expansion a waste of time if unsupported by any follow-up biodiversity studies. Support so far. Efforts to support marine protected areas management can also be assessed by how the Belize Funds Trust has been dispersed up to now. Most recently, MPA co-managers who are members of the Belize Marine Protected Areas Network received an additional $3,895,000 over 3 years, June 2024 to May 2027, to subsidize their operating costs, including ranger salaries. That's on top of almost $560,000 the network received in emergency gap funding in 2022 and over $2.5 million awarded to individual MPA co-managers through the Grants Awards programs first 2 funding cycles in support of their enforcement capacity. such as the 360-degree tower camera installed at Sea's Laughing Bird Key National Park, or improving fisheries compliance at SACD's Corozal Wildlife Sanctuary. As an explanation for why MPA co-managers have received the most recent amount of approved grant funding, the Belize Fund's communication officer, Chelsea Gill-Anthony, stated in an email that as Belize moves towards protecting 30% of its ocean space, enforcement has become a critical gap. Our 3-year partnership with BMPAN strengthens co-managers' core operations and enforcement capacity, including drones, long-range cameras, and smart systems, to ensure these areas are effectively managed. As a result of these various efforts to support MPAs, co-managers have to date received a little over 7 million Belize dollars of the $26,324,312 approved for distribution, just over a quarter of all funds distributed so far. To address this discrepancy, the Belize Fund is currently reviewing the 4th round of GAP proposals with a particular focus on assisting less resource registered organizations via community grants, albeit capped at 50,000 Belize per proposal. That's $25,000 less than the $75,000 provided to community grant recipients like the Chinooks Fishermen Association last year. During this latest funding cycle, the Belize Fund provided additional support to grant applicants whose concept papers were accepted. For those applicants, the Belize Fund held 5 webinars that Anthony wrote were intended to provide more tailored guidance on the proposal development process. The Belize Fund is currently reviewing 6 community grant proposals, with a potential $300,000 Belize if all are awarded. 4 were awarded during the last cycle. The Belize Fund will also provide community grant recipients with support in project implementation, monitoring, and reporting. In past grant cycles, demonstrating capacity to complete these tasks, proposal development and project management, has created a hurdle for organizations that lack institutional capacity for work beyond their day-to-day survival activities. Reflecting on this issue, Chavarria stated that the Belize Fund GAP is a good program with good intentions. It just needs to be set up in a way that the real people who need it get access. While the Belize Fund refines its funding and disbursement strategy, TIDE has recently established a small grants program, an initiative co-funded by the Belize Fund and the Mesoamerican Reef Fund. The program will support projects in the areas of eco-friendly tourist ventures, small-scale agriculture, sustainable seafood processing, and alternative livelihoods. Providing up to 8,000 Belize, TIDE intends to support fishers licensed for zones within the sites it co-manages, including the Port Honduras Marine Reserve, where a gillnet killed the hawksbill turtle and other marine animals mentioned at the opening of the story. As Belize continues on its trajectory towards its next milestone this month in fulfillment of the Conservation Funding Agreement, it remains to be seen to what extent those outside MPA enforcement will receive the support necessary to secure their stake in the country's marine space. Credits: additional reporting by Marco Lopez. This story was published with support from Internews' Earth Journalism Network. The opening theme song is by Alexander Evans, and the closing theme is by Michael Pacheco.